In Argentina, the leaders of the Puebla Group said they would defend progressive leaders, victims of systematic judicial persecution. Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping signed comprehensive partnership and bilateral strategic cooperation agreements. And in Kenya, opposition leader Raila Odinga vows to continue the campaign of nationwide protests. Local media say over 200 people have been arrested in Monday's demonstrations. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. The leaders of the Puebla Group said they would defend progressive leaders who are victims of a system of judicial persecution at a meeting called Popular Will and Democracy. The former president of Colombia, Ernesto Samper, pointed out that one of the tasks of the Puebla Group is to defend leftist leaders who are victims of judicial persecution. Moreover, this organization reaffirmed that it wants to support the vice president of Argentina, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, who is a victim of this persecution, just as Luis Ignacio da Silva in Brazil, Rafael Correa in Ecuador, and Evo Morales in Bolivia have been victims of these attacks. Finally, the panelists proposed an act of intellectual sovereignty to recover an image of the future that addresses injustice and inequalities. In Argentina, the third International Human Rights Forum continues with the participation of the former president of Bolivia, Evo Morales, who reiterated that the forum was convened because of the unfairness in the fight for human rights.
I was thinking, why are we organizing in here? Why are we in this World Forum of Human Rights? For what are we organizing ourselves? For what are the social movements such as peasant workers, middle class, intellectuals? Because there is unfairness in the fight of the authorities for human rights, on the part of individual rights, collective rights, the fight for social demands, but also for structural changes in our economic models.
On Tuesday, the Venezuelan parliament reaffirmed its support for the National Executive's investigation, the fight against corruption. The deputies of the Venezuelan legislature have agreed to support investigations into cases of embezzlement in several institutions. The agreement to support the investigation on the fight against corruption states that the legislature should act and support all relevant actions against corruption. Moreover, the Deputy Diosdado Cabello stated that the approval of the agreement initiates the fight against all those involved within the national institutions, regardless of their position.
Mr. President, in consideration of this, I ask for the approval of this agreement in support of the initiative of President Nicolás Maduro in the fight against corruption. And I repeat, I want to make it clear that it is President Nicolás Maduro who has been at the forefront of this battle from the very first moment. Let there be no doubt to anyone. Let there be absolutely no doubt to anyone. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, fellow parliamentarians. Thank you to the Board of Directors. Thank you to our country. The Bolivarian Revolution will not rest in the fight against the corrupt, no matter what their names are, where they hide, and who they are. Thank you.
Deputy Diosdado Cabello also recalled that corruption has been present for many years, but the Bolivarian Revolution has faced it with courage.
It is important to say that this is not the first time that this has happened, but it is also important to say that in the Bolivarian Revolution we have never become a society of complicity. Every time we have had to face corruption, we have faced it. We have given it the adequate, correct, and precise treatment, without complicity, without chronism, with strength and determination. It is not the anti-corruption fight that puts the Bolivarian Revolution on the defensive. On the contrary, it strengthens us, because it indicates that as long as we fight against this scourge, we are on the right track.
On the other hand, the President of the National Assembly, Jorge Rodriguez, reiterated that the investigations into corruption cases have just begun and that all those involved will be punished by the justice system.
This investigation has just begun. There are several dozens of high officials, mayors, and judges arrested. It has just begun. And if later it turns out that some mayor of the opposition is involved in corrupt activities related to public funds, that receive commissions for land concessions or urban developments, then they'll go claiming freedom for a political prisoner because he or she would be as crook as the mayor that we have just put in jail.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro received his counterpart from the Sahrawi Democratic Arab Republic, Ibrahim Ali, at the Miraflores Palace. The leaders met as part of the agenda established during the official visit of the delegation of the African nation to promote beneficial alliances for both nations. The agenda has the purpose of determining the ways to contribute to the strengthening and development of the two countries. The Sahrawi delegation thanked the support expressed by the Venezuelan head of state to the peoples of Africa, especially to the Democratic Sahrawi Arab Republic that is fighting for its independence and dignity. In Chile, the Senate's Finance Committee has approved a bill which cuts the working week from 45 to 40 hours. The initiative was sent to the upper chamber and will be voted on next week. The bill had originally been introduced in 2017 and approved by the chamber in 2019, after which it was passed on to the Senate, where nothing happened until 2022. The initiative foresees setting the working week with 4 workdays and 3 days off. The measure will extend to micro, small, and medium-sized companies, giving workers and employers flexibility to agree on additional compensatory days for working overtime. The President of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, denounced on Tuesday that the United States government does not want to abandon the bone row or manifest destiny doctrines in its relations with the region. The issue came up during his press conference in the state of Oaxaca, following a question about U.S. statements that claimed that Mexican executive violates human rights. President Manuel López Obrador strongly denied this affirmation and described it as pure politicking that shows they do not want to abandon these outdated doctrines. López Obrador affirmed that Washington believes it rules over the world and sees the speck in someone else's eyes but not the plank in its own. The head of Mexican state regretted Washington's comments and described this behavior as not serious.
It's as if we were evaluating them. Hey, why don't you release Assange if you are talking about journalism freedom? Why do you have Assange in jail? If you talk about acts of violence, how come an award-winning journalist in the U.S. claims that the U.S. government sabotaged the Russian gas pipeline to Europe and you make sense of him? And so, why do you allow a cartel or several cartels to operate in the U.S. that distribute fentanyl freely that does so much harm to young people? Or tell them, what are you doing with young people so they don't use fentanyl?
Let's take a short break, but first remember you can follow us on TikTok at the account at teleSUR English, in which you'll be able to see news in different formats, news updates, and much more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back from the South. Russian President Vladimir reported that his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping signed 2 joint statements on comprehensive partnership and bilateral strategic cooperation. The Chinese head of state said that they had also signed a memorandum of understanding on the implementation of a development plan in key areas of economic cooperation until 2030. The Russian president stressed that the signing of the agreements fully reflects the special nature of the Russian-Chinese relations, and he also emphasized that they are at the highest level of development in history. Both leaders agreed that the attacks on the Nord Stream gas pipelines should be impartially investigated, while welcoming the Chinese request to put an end to the tensions in Ukraine promoted by the hostilities of some Western governments.
I would like to emphasize that on the issue of the Ukraine crisis, China has always followed the principles of the UN Charter, upholding an objective and fair stance, actively promoting peace talks, always standing firmly on the side of peace, dialogue, and on the right side of history.
President Putin expressed during the talks with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping that Moscow will be forced to react if Britain gives Ukraine military supplies, including armor-piercing ammunition which contains depleted uranium.
It was revealed today that the UK, through the country's Deputy Defense Minister, has not only announced the supply of tanks to Ukraine, but also shells with depleted uranium. It seems that the West has indeed decided to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian, not in words, but in deeds. If this happens, Russia will be forced to react. I mean, the collective West is starting to use weapons with a nuclear component.
In addition, cooperation between China and Russia was one of the main agreements that will continue to be strengthened.
Further growth of Russian gas exports will be facilitated by the implementation of the agreement concluded in January on the construction of the Far Eastern gas route, as well as the initiative to build the Power of Serbia 2 gas pipeline through Mongolia.
We have signed a joint statement to deepen our comprehensive partnership and strategic engagement as we enter a new era, and a joint statement on the development plan for key areas of Chinese-Russian economic cooperation for the period up to 2030. Together, President Putin and I summed up the result of the development of bilateral relations over the past 10 years and agreed that Sino-Russian ties have gone far beyond bilateral relations and are of vital importance for the modern world order and the destiny of mankind.
Turkey President Recep Tayyip Erdogan officially announced on Tuesday his candidacy for the May 14th general elections, in which he will face the only opposition candidate, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. The Supreme Electoral Council had announced a few days ago the list of 36 political parties authorized to participate in the elections, where the Grand National Assembly will also be renewed. President Erdogan will seek re-election for a third 5-year term, within the context of recovery efforts after the earthquakes that affected the country in February. According to polls, the Turkish president comes out as favorite, despite the strong criticism his government received from various sectors for what they consider the lack of contingency plans to face natural events of big magnitude, in reference to last month's quakes. In France, trade unions continue their day-long protests against the pension reform imposed by the government of Emmanuel Macron. French trade unions are staging a new day of demonstrations across the country on Tuesday, saying they will not stop until the pension reform is cancelled. Various organizations have also described the reform as unjustified, unfair, and brutal. In addition, it has been reported that around 300 people were arrested on Monday following clashes between demonstrators and security forces. A press release from the Central General Workers' Center states that nothing will undermine the determination of the workers, unemployed, young people, and pensioners in response to the rejection of the motions of censure tabled by parliamentarians. The parliamentary leader of the far-left France En Voix party, Mathilde Panot, called on all those who can to turn out en masse for the demonstrations that are scheduled on Thursday, saying it will be a historical day. A new round of strikes and protests has been called, which are expected to once again paralyze public transport in several areas.
I call on all those who can to come to their demonstrations in numbers on Thursday, to go on strike if they can, to contribute to the Strikes Fund. In short, to be a great movement of solidarity, to tell the President of the Republic that we too will not give up, and that he cannot force his way through against an entire people. Today, with the rest of the NUPs, we are going to submit our referral to the Constitutional Council, and we will obviously continue to battle with, as I said, all the tools at our disposal. Thursday is going to be a historic day, and I believe that the President must withdraw his reform as soon as possible.
teleSUR English continues to grow. You can now tune in from 33 different African countries through StarSat, dial 461, and enjoy a Latin American alternative broadcast. One final short break, and we'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back from the South. Kenya's opposition leader Raila Odinga vowed on Tuesday to continue the campaign of nationwide protests. Odinga's statement came one day after demonstrations marred with clashes saw more than 200 people arrested. At least 4 lawmakers were among those arrested during the protests, including the leaders of Odinga's faction in both houses of parliament. According to Nairobi Police Chief Adamson Bungei, the legislators arrested have been released and are to appear in court on Thursday on charges that have not yet been announced. Demonstrations are the first major outbreak of political violence in the East African nation since President William Ruto took office 6 months ago. Opposition leader Raila Odinga claims the elections were stolen and cited the high cost of staples as the main cause for the high inflation. Iranian leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei calls on all the country's officials to focus on economic and humanitarian issues. In a nationally televised address on the occasion of the beginning of the Persian New Year on Tuesday, Khamenei congratulated the Iranian people and all nations on the celebration of Nowruz and highlighted economic development as the most important issue in the country. The top leader stressed the need to prioritize economic activities with the aim of creating prosperity in people's lives and bringing food to their tables. In his opinion, the task cannot be achieved without continuity and detailed planning. He reminded that economic problems are not unique to Iran, as stronger and more advanced economies are suffering from the same difficulties, even bankruptcies and extraordinary debts. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei says during his speech in Mashhad marking the Nowruz New Year that the Islamic Republic is not upset with European nations and is ready to work with them if they do not blindly follow U.S. policies.
Our relationship with the West had weakened. We had no relations with the U.S. and our ties with Europe had weakened, but we have strengthened our ties with Asia 100%, and we will continue this. We will continue political, economic, technical, and scientific relationship with the main sectors of Asian countries.
Khamenei also referred to Western accusations that Iran is involved in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict.
They falsely claim that Iran is participating in the Ukraine war. Not at all. Such a thing is not true. We have no participation. In fact, the United States started the Ukraine war to expand NATO eastward. Currently, the United States is benefiting the most out of the Ukraine war.
On Tuesday, Israel's parliament approved an amendment that would legalize 4 evacuated settlements in the West Bank. Israel's parliament has given its final backing to a controversial amendment to a 2005 law that led to the evacuation of 4 West Bank settlements amid the government's work to expand settlements in the Palestinian territories. The development of this amendment could pave the way for an official return to abandoned areas of the West Bank and further deepen the crisis. It was the latest move by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's far-right government, dominated by settler leaders and allies, to promote settlement activity in the territory. The international community considers the settlements illegal and opposes construction in the occupied territories claimed by the Palestinians for a future independent state. After long years of war and in spite of the continuous blockade and the anguish caused by the recent earthquake, Syria recovers its traditional festivities that mark its millenary civilized culture. The feast of welcoming the Holy Ramadan, the month of Muslim fasting, about to begin in the Arab world, is a sample of these authentic traditional festivals of the Arab nation. From Damascus, our correspondent Hisham Wanos brings us the following story.
Dressed in traditional clothes of the historic Levant, members of Damascene families flock in groups to the area of Al-Rabwe on the bank of the Barada River that crosses Damascus to celebrate in a fraternal atmosphere impregnated with joy the upcoming beginning of the Muslim month of fasting, which they consider sacred because it commemorates the first revelation to the Prophet Muhammad of the Quran, the holy book of Islam.
The economic crisis resulting from the war and the blockade has reduced traditional activities such as this one, as the rise in prices affects our way of life, but the celebration today of this feast here and in other parts of the country shows that we are sticking to our customs and transmitting them to the new generations who have not lived through the good times we had before the war.
Those gathered celebrate the occasion with the preparation of traditional foods that they share at a farewell dinner for the month free of fasting. They prepare for a month in which a Muslim practices a fast that lasts from sunrise to sunset, a religious practice that the devotees hope will ingrain willpower, patience, solidarity, and tolerance as values that embody the true image of Islam.
The month of Ramadan is a month of devotion. Therefore, before the beginning of this sacred month, people go to the areas in which trees and rivers are plentiful, especially now that it coincides with the beginning of spring, to celebrate the beginning of this month with traditional practices typical of our country, and this year is the 6th year that we revive this tradition since the beginning of the war.
This celebration demonstrates our deep-rooted values of harmony and tolerance, to which we adhere in spite of the aftermath of the blockade and the war, determined to continue life with hope and faith in the future, convinced that hope is never lost.
Just as it begins with joy, Ramadan culminates in a feast that lasts 3 days. A moment of joy in the midst of the enormous difficulties the country is experiencing as a result of war, the blockade, and now the earthquake. We show that Syria is not giving up and its people are not losing faith in a better future.
Hisham Wannous, teleSUR, Damascus, Syria.
We have come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. Also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For telesur English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.